So for our next speaker, some of you might already know her. Her name is Penninah. She is a senior quantitative UX researcher working at Idealo in Germany, where she has been living since 2006. She is actually American. And her professional focus is on neurodivergence and mental health in UX research. Penninah herself was diagnosed with ADHD and sensory processing disorder in adulthood. And last year, she had an amazing talk for us about making the UXR field more accessible for neurodivergent professionals. The talk was vulnerable, it was entertaining, and practical, so everything you want in a talk. And I was sitting in the audience at the time and really enjoyed it. So she also received a lot of reactions after this talk, which made her realize that, she should talk about this more. And that's why we've invited her back this year. And we are really pleased to have Penninah joining us again. Thank you, Penninah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. You're gonna hand me that first, right? Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, as was just mentioned, I was here last year, and I spoke to this audience, or a similar audience. Maybe some of you were there last year as well. Maybe some of you have seen the recording of my talk from last year. I realized yesterday that calling this part 2 may have made some of you feel a little bit uncomfortable, whereas part 1, I'm really sorry about that. Part 1 is available as a recording on the UXinsight Festival website if you want to go back and watch it. However, you do not have to have seen it in order to listen in today. I repeat the parts that are important so that you can understand what I'm talking about. So I promise you haven't missed too much to be able to understand what I want to talk about today. But yeah, last year I stood on the stage and I talked about my struggles with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD. And I tried to be really authentic and really talk about some of the struggles that I have been through. I talked about the physical stress of back-to-back usability tests and how I'm physically incapable of doing it. And I talked a lot about how I always need to have something to do with my hands in order to be able to focus during meetings. So like knitting or doing art or whatever. And I also shared a couple of my strategies to deal with little symptoms here and there that I deal with every day, and yeah, shared that with the audience. And what really shocked me was the amount of response I received following this presentation. So right directly afterwards, I had people approaching me, outside getting drinks. I received tons of LinkedIn messages, and I continued to receive these messages over the course of the last year as people kind of found my video and watched it, and then reached out to me. And that made me start thinking, wow, we have a big problem here. So in January, I actually ran a study on social media where I was trying to figure out, what's the prevalence of neurodiversity in the UX field. And 69% of the people who responded to my study, who were UX professionals, were either clinically diagnosed with some form of neurodiversity or suspected that they were. Now, to be clear, this was an extremely biased result. We do not have a 69% prevalence rate. But what it does show is that if you have ADHD, if you're a neurodiverse and a UX professional, then you are not alone. And I think that's really important to understand because ADHD and other forms of neurodiversity can be extremely lonely. Today I'm going to really focus on ADHD, and I'm going to hone in on one symptom in particular and talk about some of my strategies that I've developed over time to deal with that particular symptom. So if you've never heard of the term neurodiversity, I want to explain it to you briefly. Neurodiversity refers to the natural variations of the human brain, the way we think, the way we learn, the way we experience and manage emotions, the way we move, the way, pretty much anything that happens in your brain, it can be different for individuals, and that's why we refer to it as neurodiversity. Now, neurodiversity, the term used to be used to talk about, to depathologize autism, but now it's come to encompass more than that, so ADHD, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, dyslexia, Tourette's syndrome. It also includes mental health illnesses like depression, anxiety, OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder, personality disorders. And neurodiversity can also be acquired, so through psychological trauma or through brain injury. And I would even go so far as to consider the changes in cognition during menopause, which starts as early as 35 years old, by the way, to also actually be a form of neurodiversity. Now, another term I want to talk about that, so you can understand, in the course of this talk, what it means, is the term neurotypical. And neurotypical is often placed in like an opposition to neurodiverse. It's considered an opposite, but I think there's still a lot of overlap that it's important to keep in mind. So I'm considered neurodiverse because I have ADHD and a couple of other mental health illnesses, but I would consider like my writing skills and my reading skills to be more neurotypical. And somebody who is largely neurotypical obviously will have experienced in their lifetime, for sure, maybe not being able to focus so much. Maybe if they're stressed about something, then they'll have more difficulties focusing, or maybe they'll be a little bit fidgety. So they'll have experienced some of the symptoms that I experience, but what it comes down to is the persistency, the intensity, and just the extent that somebody experiences these symptoms, and that kind of decides whether they're neurodiverse or more neurotypical. So basically, if you don't have any of these things in these blue circles, then you're basically neurotypical. And as soon as you have one of them, even one, you're considered neurodiverse. So, in order to talk about how I manage some of my symptoms, I want to talk really briefly about what causes ADHD. And there's a bunch of different theories out there about what causes ADHD, but a lot of them actually focus on the neurotransmitter dopamine. And dopamine plays a pivotal role in being able to focus. Dopamine is the brain's internal reward system, and people with ADHD have two problems with dopamine. The first is we have less dopamine in our brains. And the other problem is that dopamine is released in a different pattern in ADHD brains than in neurotypical ones. I don't want to get into the details on it, but their theory is called, wait a second, got to double check, dopamine transfer deficit theory. So if you want to look it up, it's really interesting. And I've lost my train of thought, sorry about that. In a work setting, basically what that means is that if somebody's trying to complete like a report, or they're doing a task at work, somebody who's neurotypical is going to receive dopamine while they're working on the project, because the actual task that they're completing is enough to trigger that internal reward system and to make them feel like happy, good feelings. Somebody with ADHD is going to receive dopamine from a task either too early, so before they do the task, and it's gone by the time they're trying to start the task. Sometimes they'll receive the dopamine hit after they're finished. They're super excited that they finally finished it. It was a really hard time getting that task done, but they're finished, and now they finally feel that happy feeling. Or the dopamine release can not happen at all, so there'll be no internal reward that comes as the result of finishing a task. So now that we know, on a neurological level, what's happening, but on the outside, what does that look like? And what it looks like on the outside is very sad. For me, what it means is I am sitting in front of my computer, and I know I have something I have to do. Synthesis or analyzing a usability test is one of the hardest things for me because it's very unfocused. It's very fuzzy phase sort of situation. And so I'm sitting there, and I know I have to do something. I have a deadline, and I physically cannot make my fingers type. And I am completely unable to make the gears in my brain turn. And it has nothing to do with work ethic. It has nothing to do with laziness or procrastination. What I'm facing is a barrier, and I have to find a way to get past that barrier. The problem is, while I'm sitting there and not getting work done, my frustration is rising. My shame is rising. I feel like a failure in that moment. And it can be really, really difficult to get out of that kind of emotional cycle that I'm going through. And that's when I start doing things like reaching for my phone, and maybe scrolling social media, because I'm trying to escape those horrible feelings that this situation is triggering in me. So that's what it looks like on the outside. And now that we know also, what is one neurological reason why I could be experiencing that, that gives us power. With knowledge, there is power, and with knowing what causes ADHD in one form, we can also think about how can we solve this problem at that neurological level. And one way to do that is to trigger dopamine release in the brain through something else, and use that dopamine high to achieve a task, to use the focusing effect of dopamine. If it's not being triggered by what I'm supposed to be doing, I trigger it with something else. So, what are some things that trigger dopamine? What could I use? Eating and snacking. Novelty, so anything new. Exercise, anything you enjoy, literally anything. And this is actually part of the reason why some people are diagnosed with ADHD so late in life, because if they're doing something that interests them intrinsically, they can focus on it for like 18 hours straight. And so it can be misread as being, oh yeah, that person can focus, but really they're focusing on something that they enjoy. Ice baths. I tried it. It wasn't my thing. I'm going to keep trying. Maybe somebody's had ice baths here and they said it was great. It's supposed to be as good as cocaine, by the way, but... and sex, but we will skip that conversation for today. So how do I biohack my dopamine on a daily basis? I talked about this last year. So that was the whole thing with the knitting. If I'm sitting in a meeting, I'm knitting outside of the view of my camera. Nowadays, everybody knows what's going on, so I don't even try to hide it anymore. I listen to music, especially if I'm doing like menial tasks. I'll turn it on really loud. I have a standing desk, and I have a walking pad underneath my standing desk, so I can walk during meetings and during anything where I don't have to do a lot of typing. And I snack, and very obviously, I'm always snacking on charcuterie boards, definitely not chocolate or chips. And these are all things that really anybody can do. It doesn't matter whether you're a UX researcher or whether you work at a desk job anywhere else. These are very global dopamine hacks that you can do. And so these trigger the dopamine, and they make it possible to focus then on whatever task you're supposed to be doing. But I want to tell you a little bit about what sort of things I do in my everyday UX research to trigger dopamine that, maybe are a little bit more individual to me, but I want to share them because I want to show that finding things that trigger your dopamine is a very individual thing. And for one thing, I absolutely love rainbows. I love color, I love rainbows, I love the gradients, like gradient color from one color to the next. How do you like my shoes? Check that out. Love it. And so what I try to do for fun is I try to integrate rainbows into a lot of my work. What it does is it makes it so that building a tool, for instance, in Miro, so I've got like a Gantt diagram, which is like the most boring thing in the world, and I've turned it into something that I enjoy working with, a little bit at least, by turning it into like rainbow colors, and it's fun to build for me, it's fun for me to use, I keep returning to it, and that makes it easier for me to do a menial task like planning the timing of a project. Now, maybe rainbows aren't really your thing. That's okay. Maybe you like a specific show or a specific band. Anything that you really like is something that you can bring with you to work. And it's possible that you might run into somebody who questions your professionalism, especially if, I don't know, you're a Game of Thrones fan and you've decided to use the cast of Game of Thrones in place of stock photos of personas or something like that. Yes, somebody is probably going to question that. But I am of the opinion that if anything helps you overcome a barrier, helps you with your productivity, helps you achieve your goals, then actually that's a very professional thing to be doing and not an unprofessional one. Now, obviously, if you're going to be visiting clients or whatever, it's probably a good idea to switch out those pictures once you're done with the bulk of the work, but ultimately, it's going to help you to achieve your goals. There's one project that I did that definitely could have made some people question my professionalism, but I had a lot of fun doing it. It was super novel and interesting and fun, and so I want to tell you about it. And at the time I did this project, I was working with the customer experience team at Idealo. And if you don't know Idealo, Idealo is a price comparison platform. So we are really solidly in like e-commerce and like online shopping industry. And what we wanted to do with this project was we wanted to find out how we could help online shoppers with their, fill their needs in a way that online shopping doesn't do yet for people. We were kind of looking innovative in the future, what kind of cool things can we develop? And so I wanted to do a research project where I took a step back and I didn't look at how online shopping was done with our website, but rather, what sort of pain points do online shoppers have on a daily basis, completely separate from Idealo, just general online shopping? And I decided that for this project, as a source of secondary research, I was going to take a look at memes and humor. So I literally put into Google search online shopping memes and a couple of other keywords here and there. And I collected as many memes as I could on the topic of online shopping, sorted them, and was able to identify a number of pain points that people face when they're online shopping to use later in my research method. So obviously I was planning on doing more than that. This was first the desk research, and after the fact I was intending to do interviews. Unfortunately the project never got finished, but that is the way it is sometimes in UX research. So I just want to show you some of the memes that I found. I'll give you a moment to read some of them. My personal favorite is the pug. I've ordered too much stuff online and I can't remember what I'm waiting for. That is a constant ADHD problem. Yeah. So from this analysis, I was able to identify, a group of pain areas where I was able to kind of structure how I was going to ask questions later in an interview setting. I don't want to go through them individually, but I do want to point out the color gradient from blue to green. Yeah, and the final strategy that I want to share with you today, so I started with rainbows, something that I enjoy, that I added into my work, and then I talked about now, a project that maybe was a little bit weird, a little bit wild, and a little bit novel and different, that also was interesting for me and helped me to skip the task paralysis that I face when I'm working. And the final strategy I want to talk about is structure. So it may seem simple, but structure is both a blessing and a curse for people with ADHD. And this person summed it up wisely in their tweet, very eloquently. ADHD is so funny because structure feels like a prison. But if I have no structure, I descend into executive dysfunction and do nothing for days. So I want to warn you, this chapter is not yet finished. I haven't discovered the perfect system for structuring my work, and I've been really trying new things, and I'm learning about myself, and I want to share that with you to show you that when you struggle with something like ADHD, the accommodations that you need in order to manage your work are not going to be clear-cut. They're not the same for everybody. They're not easy to identify. Sometimes they have to be super creative. Sometimes they are decided upon by minute detail whether they are actually going to be helpful or not. And I want to share that process with you so that you can see that it's not always as easy as it may seem. So let me show you right now where I am in learning to structure myself. I started my self-organization journey with Trello. I was able to make good use of color. I got my rainbow colors going, marking the days of the week, and I love space, so I have like a nebula background so that I go into that chart every day and felt really good about myself. Problem was, my organization doesn't allow us to use Trello, so I had to find something else. So I switched to Miro because we all love Miro, and here I have to admit I bit off more than I could chew. What I did there is I made my system way too complex, added way too many things into it so that it became really difficult for me to keep up with. Then I switched to, where did I switch to? Here, Microsoft To Do, which I thought, okay, I have less stuff to maintain then. I don't have to copy and paste so much. It's, it'll be easier for me to keep up with these like smart functions. Unfortunately, Microsoft's smart functions are not quite smart enough, and it caused me to have to do just as much maintenance. And then somewhere in there, I also tried Microsoft Planner, because we have a shared planner board in our UX research team, and I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll just use the same tools that we're using there. But believe it or not, you cannot synchronize between boards, which meant I was doing the same thing in 2 different boards, and that is absolute torture and a complete dopamine killer for me. So, darn, what do I do now? And the thing is, while these were all failures, what I did learn from it is a lot of very minute details about what my structure has to look like for it to be successful. And to be completely honest, I'm not even certain that I will ever have a perfect system that I can continuously use over time. In fact, it might even be that my system is literally reinventing my system every 6 months, or more often than that, unfortunately. So if that sounds exhausting, it's a reminder of how exhausting ADHD can actually be. But here's what I have learned about myself from all of these attempts. First of all, I need actionable tasks, so I can't just say plan usability test. No, I have to do it in minute detail. Every single step has to be a single task so that it's actionable for me. Meetings have to be treated like tasks because they are. I have to be able to check them off. And I have to be able to see what am I doing every day so that I can plan when I can complete tasks. I have to have a weekly planning session on Mondays. I hate this session so much because it is very repetitive, it's super boring, and I really try my best to do my walking and my snacking and my coffee drinking and stuff during this particular session. And I have to schedule tasks per day. So right at the beginning of the week, I say I'm going to do this on Monday, I'm going to do this on Tuesday, I'm going to do this on Friday. Doing per time slot doesn't work for me because then it feels too much like a prison. It's too structured then. My done tasks have to remain visible. Microsoft does this. Or doesn't do this is what I'm saying. Microsoft, if you click done, it like disappears off of the planner board or disappears off of the list. You can make it visible again, but the default is that it disappears. But I need that. I need to be able to see what I've completed because it gives me dopamine. It makes me go, yes, that's what I succeeded at doing today. And it needs to be an aesthetically pleasing system. It has to be pretty. If it's not pretty, I'm not going to use it. And finally, low maintenance. If I have to copy and paste something every single week or every single day, I'm done for. I can manage it for a couple of weeks when it's still interesting and new, but over time, it becomes a too menial task, and it no longer works for me. And I want to end this talk by talking about how I was preparing for the talk today. And I was sitting at my dining room table with my son, who's 7 years old, and he was doing his homework. He was doing his cursive homework, and he was sitting next to me, workbook open on the table, and he kept complaining, I don't want to do this right now. I don't want to do my homework. He even had his pencil in his hand, but it was almost impossible for him to sit down and just start. And I'm here with my laptop open. I have biohacking open on my screen, and I'm sitting there frustrated with him. I'm frustrated. Why don't you just do your homework? You have your workbook open in front of you. You have your pencil. Why don't you just do it? And it took me longer than I'd like to admit that, I realized then, oh, hey, I have some ideas that could actually make this easier for him. And fortunately, the light bulb moment did happen, and I pulled out some chewing gum because he loves chewing gum, and I turned on his favorite music and turned on his favorite playlist, and he just rocked out in his chair, dancing in his chair, and was just doing cursive and standing up and dancing between lines of cursive. And if I had been able to look into his young brain, I'd have seen it light up with activity by dopamine, basically. And so I just want to say with this point that even when you have ideas for how you can manage, ADHD symptoms or symptoms of other forms of neurodiversity, it doesn't mean it's easy to implement. Sometimes we still forget that those strategies are there and need constant reminding. So I hope the strategies that I've shared with you today can inspire and encourage you to be creative in the ways that you search for your own accommodations if you are neurodiverse. If you're not neurodiverse, I hope that this talk could give you a little bit of empathy for those of us who do have ADHD or other forms of neurodiversity. Just to be clear, 4.5% of the population, the general population, have ADHD, which means if there are 300 people listening today, that's 15 people in this audience, if I've done the math right. I'm only a quantitative researcher. That have ADHD. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Penninah.
No, I went too far.
That's
I'll
all
think about
right.
it.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. I love the strategies that you shared. And, you know, it seems so easy, but it's so clever to integrate something that you really love into tasks that you don't love. So your rainbow, I think, you know, for anyone, that is a great strategy. Next time I need to do anything in Excel, I'm going to put cats all over it.
Yes.
I have to
We actually did that in a presentation at Idealo. My colleagues did that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You know, some people like cats. It's just a thing. Anyway, but thank you so much for this. It was a lovely, lovely presentation, and I'm sure there are lots of questions as well.
Yeah, there are already lots of questions on Slido and also quite some comments online saying that these are also great organizational tips for everyone.
Yes.
But the very first and kind of most upvoted question so far is, what advice would you give to managers? And maybe we can also expand it to colleagues, kind of trying to support team members with ADHD.
Yeah. So if you're a manager supporting somebody with ADHD, first of all, some of your employees might not even know that they have ADHD. ADHD is super underdiagnosed, especially in women and in people of color. And so you kind of face this situation where somebody might not even realize that they need accommodations. I think it's always important, communication is always the most important, is, you know, working with this employee, discovering what barriers they're facing, and also using that wording to describe it. Not, why are you doing so poorly, why are you so slow, you know, why aren't you doing the work that you're supposed to be doing, but rather, what is in your way? What is stopping you right now from achieving your goal? And asking, how do you think I can support you? You can bring, if you've heard my talk, for instance, you can bring these sort of ideas. You know, I've heard this lady, she talked about this sort of stuff. Here are some ideas. But it really makes sure to give that person the power to decide for themselves. Because there's another form of task paralysis, by the way. This is all about task paralysis. I didn't even mention what it's called, and I have it about like 1,000 times in my notes. This is called task paralysis, and there's different forms of it, and there's forms of it that can also be triggered by too high expectations from somebody else. So you also have to keep that in mind if you're a manager, that you don't accidentally trigger the task paralysis yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also good to kind of remember, because you're also sharing kind of some tips and like what worked for you, like the rainbows or the memes, but maybe for someone else
it could be something
it could be
entirely
completely
different.
something else.
Yeah.
But it's good to take this as an inspiration and also see that.
And to be open about those sort of things, that it's going to be weird. It's going to be a weird phase where you're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And there's also going to be mistakes made, lots of mistakes, before you get into this rhythm where things actually kind of function.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's thank you for also being vulnerable with us and open to share these things. We have another question that got quite some upvotes, that is about, how do you approach telling colleagues or team members that you live with any form of neurodiversity? Should we do it at all, and in what context?
Yeah, this is a very, very individual thing. There's a couple of things you have to keep in mind. First of all, the company I work for, the culture is top-notch. I felt very, very safe telling my boss, when I first found out I had ADHD, I was very, very open with him, and I felt very, very comfortable telling him that I have ADHD, because there is this culture at my company that just really supports openness and diversity and inclusion. And I've also worked places in my career where I did not feel safe to divulge information like that. At that time, I didn't even know I had ADHD, but I would not have felt safe to do so. So I think it's a very individual thing. You have to find out for yourself, am I safe to say this where I work? And do I really even need people to know? I'm an oversharer, so I tell everybody everything, every minute detail, but maybe you're somebody who's more private, and then you have to decide for yourself, is this something that I think people need to know about me?
Yeah, yeah. So it's really personal. Like you kind of, and safety is a very good thing to consider.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at our audience here. Do we have people who want to ask questions in the microphone box?
Got a question over there.
Over there.
Yes.
We've got Shoma helping us out with the microphone box.
It's a very long throw.
Who was it? It's time to throw.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
no. Pass it on.
Time to wake up.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very inspirational to hear the other perspective. In your presentation, you mentioned that I quote, structure feels like a prison sometimes, but you need it for the reasons that you stated. How does this translate into particular research, namely qualitative versus quantitative? Where do you face these issues, and is it quantitative research harder because it might demand more structure?
I didn't quite get the last part of your question. I'm sorry. Could you say that again?
Does the quantitative research give you more hardship because it is more structured, it is more statistical, more analytical?
Actually, it's the opposite for me. Quantitative research actually is helpful to me. I'm actually a quantitative researcher. I do mixed methods anyways, but I'm officially a quantitative researcher because I love statistics. It's one of my special interests. It's intrinsically motivating to me. So the structure of it doesn't really have quite so much effect on my work because I just truly love statistical analyses. To my detriment sometimes, it takes me a lot longer to finish a quantitative study than I should because I do explorative stuff I shouldn't even be doing. Yeah, so structure is super important for me, and when I'm doing qualitative studies, I actually have checklists. So I have 10 years of UX experience, and I still go through checklists in very minute detail about what I'm supposed to be doing before what point in a particular study. Like I have to do these 10 things before I can recruit participants, et cetera. So structure is super, super important just to like even jog my memory about what I'm supposed to be doing now to achieve a goal.
Thank you.
Great.
And
There's a couple more questions over here now too.
Oh, we're going from completely left to the right. Some running around. Oh yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering, this might be a bit out of scope, but your presentation mostly focused on task paralysis, but I was wondering, do you have any tips for when you're in meetings with a lot of people that, there's a lot of talking, everyone goes straight through each other, there's a lot of chaos, and then suddenly there's a conclusion and you have completely missed what the conclusion of the meeting was. Do you have any tips for that?
That sucks. Yeah. I hate those kind of meetings too. This is where being open about having ADHD can be super helpful. One thing I've started doing in workshops is that I tell the people right in advance I need breaks every 45 minutes. I cannot do an hour and a half of workshop work and actually still be present at the end of that half hour, like the last half hour is just absolute torture for me. So I say right up front, listen, I'm gonna check out after 45 minutes and go do something else. I'll be back, I promise. So either they'll build in a break for me, or they'll just be like, yeah, you just do your thing, chill out, and then come back. And if I miss 5 or 10 minutes of a meeting, it's still better than missing the entire rest of the meeting as well. And what can also be helpful if you're open about your ADHD, actually you don't even need to be open about your ADHD. You can literally just interrupt everyone and be like, okay, everybody shush, this is too much. Can we come back to the point for a second? Can you repeat what you just said? Can somebody summarize what was just said because I'm lost right now? There's nothing wrong with saying, listen guys, I'm lost.
And also nothing wrong with putting in a break after 45 minutes as a thing, as a standard in general.
And the thing is, even if other people, there's going to be somebody else in that meeting who also missed something. There's going to be somebody who's going to be like, thank you for asking, because I missed it too.
And also as a general tip on meetings, just get people to write more and talk less. People writing post-its, putting them up, you can see we've already discussed this, you can go back, you've got some structure there.
For sure, for sure. Very helpful.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You? Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I think we're all super relieved to know that we're not lazy, we don't procrastinate, but maybe we have ADHD. My main question would be, how do you get diagnosed with ADHD? Is it...
I'm sorry,
can you hold it like
How do
this
you get diagnosed with ADHD?
That's a struggle. I think it's really dependent on what country you live in. I live in Germany, and I did actually go looking for a doctor who was a private doctor. I had to pay out of pocket for it so that I could even get off of a waiting list. And still then I was on a waiting list for 9 months or something like that before I finally had access to this doctor. Yeah, it's a struggle. If you have ADHD, getting access to a diagnosis is really, really hard. But I also want to say that self-diagnosis is also totally valid. I think that even if you just apply these different strategies to make your work easier for you, it doesn't actually really matter whether you have an official diagnosis or not. That diagnosis is only important if you're trying to gain access to medication, for instance. Yeah.
Thank you.
One more.
Over
One
here?
up the
Over
front
here.
here. There's a,
I see the clock like flashing up here. I'm getting nervous.
yes, throw it.
Yes.
That was a good throw.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was amazing. So I have kind of two questions. So about action paralysis. So usually when you have action paralysis, it tends to stack up. So if you get another task, it's getting worse and worse and worse, and it sometimes turns into days and weeks without productivity. So how to get out of this state? And another question on top of that is how to draw boundaries in those situations, because it's usually someone saying, yeah, you can do that and that and that, and usually I don't know how to say no to additional tasks, or once I'm full of it, I just say no, and it turns out to be mean at the end.
So that's a really great question. I'm going to start with the second question first. I had this happen to me leading up to this presentation. Finishing the last couple of slides of this presentation was incredibly hard for me. I was getting messages over LinkedIn from people saying, hey, I watched your video from last year, it was so great, and I had this like pressure growing and growing and growing. I was like, oh my gosh, you have to be as good as last year. If you're not as good as last year, it's going to be a failure, you know, and that made it really hard for me to work. Meanwhile, I had like 3 different projects going on in the background that I was supposed to be making progress on. And what I ended up doing, actually what my colleagues ended up doing is they noticed that I was off. They noticed that there was something not quite so right. I was really quiet. I wasn't really talking a whole lot. And they reached out to me and they're like, hey, is everything okay? Are you okay? And they ended up really supporting me. So I talked to my boss and I was like, hey, listen, I've got so much going on right now. I can't manage it all at the same time. And he was like, all right, we'll take you out of a project. Okay, apparently you can do that. You can just leave a project. You're like, I'm done. I have too much on my plate. I'm just not going to do this project anymore. And yeah, I had to learn to tell people that I'm not going to be participating in their project anymore and that I'm really sorry and I'd really love to, and that was extremely painful to have to do that to people, but it was really important for me to be able to manage my workload. And the other thing that my boss did is I have one colleague who's a little bit more senior than I am, and she's like full. Higher, okay, whatever. And he's like, hey, why don't you two just sit down, talk about your workload, talk about your tasks, and I just kind of like unloaded on her, and she really supported me psychologically to kind of process what I was going through. And as soon as I had somebody to talk to about it, who was really close to what I was doing, not just like a therapist, but somebody who was right there, it made it so much easier to take that pressure off and to make progress. I'm going to be completely honest with you, though, I finished this presentation at like midnight the day before I was supposed to send it. So it was really last minute. I definitely used urgency to get through. But yeah, there are moments where it really is just too much, and that's where you have to do hard things like saying no and disappointing people.
And taking care of yourself.
And taking care of yourself, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Penninah, and please connect with Penninah afterwards.
Yes.
And discuss all these things, and let's keep the conversation going about
Yes, please.
this. Thank you.
Thank you, Penninah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.